the Grey Hat Beard podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's Grey Hat Beard podcast. Here we are once again after our 2 week working hard, all from home, obviously. Let's do a quick introduction. I am Kevin McDonald. I'm the Grey of Grey Hat Beards, solutions architect at CPS, jack of all trades, master of none. Been doing plenty of SharePoint and Microsoft stuff for many years. We also have our hat today, who's down by the river.
I am down by the river. So hi, I'm Mal Eardley. I'm also a solution architect at CPS, and exactly the same as Gary, almost. Master of nothing at all, but I've been doing a lot of different things for a very long time.
So I'm Gary Trinder, Solutions Architect at CPS on the beach. Well, I wish. Microsoft MVP for Office Development and PMP team member, been doing SharePoint for probably too long. Back in SharePoint 2001 up to now. So yeah, it's all been great fun.
And those of you wondering why we're talking about being at the beach and by the river, we are trying out the new backgrounds on Microsoft Teams. So apologies. I'm sat in Anfield at the moment, looking out the pitch, dreaming of better times that hopefully don't involve null and voiding. Just before we kick off, I'd like to just note to everyone, I don't know how you're listening, but we are on Spotify, we are on Apple, we are on Google. You can listen to us at greyhatbeard.com. We'd absolutely love if you could drop some ratings. We'd love to hear back from you, the feedback. We had a lovely comment from someone the other day that Kevin's nice, smooth voice helps relax them. Which I think meant they were bored and fell asleep, but I will take that as a compliment for now.
We'll take everything positively.
Exactly, everything we can. We do have some stickers, so tell you what, if you send us a rating and send us a note, we'll see if we can get some stickers out to you as well. May take a little bit longer in the current climate and getting to post offices, but please do drop us some notes and let us know what you're enjoying, what you're not enjoying. Talk of enjoying, let's go on to the news. And I know, Gary, you've been busy, but you have a bit of, tell us what you've been up to and what sort of news you have that we can chat about.
So been pretty busy Teams for the last couple of weeks, which I'm sure everyone else has been. The demand for Teams has gone through the roof. So lots of discussions about how to roll out Teams, how to get the best out of it, that kind of stuff. In terms of news, there was one thing which kind of caught my eye, and this is Microsoft releasing a license for unattended accounts. So obviously for automation scenarios, it's useful to have service accounts. We've had these on-prem for years. They've not really existed per se in the cloud, but Microsoft are now recognizing that and providing licenses for those particular accounts that you want to use for like background tasks. Automation, calling different APIs to automate processes within your Office 365 tenant. So there's not a lot of information, must admit. It doesn't tell you how much this license is and what it actually covers, but it's interesting.
It does say it's an E3 license, so I'd say the assumption is it's the same as an E3, but not necessarily.
Yeah.
It's interesting also that it's a Microsoft 365 E3 license as well, as opposed to an Office 365. So something else, because they've released a few announcements like this over the last couple of days. So because one that I picked up on as well was renaming the small business versions to Microsoft 365. So kind of met that whole licensing thing to allow unattended accounts and to rename things. Yeah, there seems to be a bit of a shake-up going on in the licensing space and what they're calling things.
I found the naming very interesting for those small and medium sized, because to me, Microsoft 365 has meant that you get Windows, you get the EMS and the security with it as well. For the small and medium sized, some of them are, but many of them aren't. I think certainly the personal and family don't include any kind of Windows license and kind of more basic versions of the security. So and they have, for me, it's made it more complicated in some ways.
Yeah, and they have also done some things like they've added Azure Active Directory P1 into Microsoft 365 Business.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah,
sorry,
because because as you say, the Microsoft 365 licensing was a combination of Office 365, EMS, and Windows. So you kind of had that cost saving there, but bringing the Active Directory P1, it makes a lot of sense. It ties up that picture for small businesses, but it does kind of beg the question of, is Office 365 going to be retired as a concept and Microsoft 365 take over?
Yeah, I think the release of these new licensing, it's interesting because I've seen that these Microsoft business packages in some senses have more features than what E3 does for a cheaper price. So having Azure AD Premium included in that is a really big benefit for businesses, because it allows you to do dynamic groups, which you've not been able to do, and that's been a real pain point of moving from on-premises Active Directory into the cloud, because we've been used to using security groups for managing users efficiently. Moving to the cloud, it's been much more difficult to do that because they have to ramp up the licenses. So now that's there as a standard, it's going to streamline a lot more things. And I think you see probably more companies now move into just being cloud AD because of that, which is interesting.
I think it begs the question of how you transition from a small business to a larger business, because as you say, the equivalent licensing, it jumps quite significantly then, rather than just being a relatively small transition.
Just a quick apology for anyone listening. The rumbling in the background, that we think there's various lawnmowers going around, so we hope it's not distracting too much from there. People enjoying a bit of sun outside. Just come back to the unattended license. Be interesting to know how that works with Power Platform, and not mentioned that we're going to be talking about governance in the Power Platform this week. But one of the issues we have is running those Power Platform, especially with Power Automate, running the connectors to things as particular accounts, whether this will fit nicely within that scenario and whether it'll be included. I certainly know a couple of people who'd be interested in using that, so that it's not tied to a single person.
So I think from my point of view, the interesting thing will be, okay, you've got a license for an unattended account, but does that make anything different? Because having these service accounts that have got a lot of power behind them, generally the issue has been, you have to turn on MFA for accounts. So turning on MFA for automation scenarios is not great because you can't interactively log in. You've got to use other means. So that's going to be interesting to see if they add anything extra to those particular accounts, give them, extra security features. Because that's obviously a concern, isn't it, with service accounts?
Yeah, no, that's true. So, Al, what have you been up to?
So, I've had the privilege of presenting at 2 online conferences this week, Teams Fest and SharePoint Saturday Warsaw, which ironically was neither in Warsaw nor was it on a Saturday. It was actually on a Friday. But both excellent events, really good content. But what I did find was that it was very interesting trying to find the time to watch other sessions whilst it was still a working day. And that was, something that I think is worth people considering when they're looking at these events, is how they book time out to say, how do I get the best out of it? I know the MVP Summit posed many challenges for many people, taking 4 days out to actually consume all of that content. And now that Ignite is now going to be an online event as well, it's kind of, what's the approach that you take to get the most out of an online conference? Because just dipping in and out doesn't really give you the same value as if you were there and properly paying attention to everything.
And are they? I know for Teams Fest they've recorded the sessions and they'll be available. Is that the same for Warsaw?
It is, and I think
that's one way is catch up later.
And they do that with Ignite, but I'll be honest, finding 25 days to watch 5 streams of stuff later, it's quite a challenge. And I think especially when you pay for things, you've invested, so therefore you've got that psychological, well, I've paid for it, so therefore I can justify not working. If it's a free event, it's not quite the same, and I think it poses challenges for some organizations where they're going, can I justify somebody being not working for a day and then consuming, the content, and because that needs to be the investment in time for people to learn.
Yeah,
and I think it's an interesting dilemma for a lot of organizations, and it's with online events, where you're saying, well, it's a full day. That's one thing. I was trying to watch the business apps Wave 1 launch yesterday, Thursday. I think it was Thursday, and I can't even remember which day it was.
Yeah,
that's the problem with being at home in the same place day in, day out. But I found it quite challenging to actually give it the attention, and it was only an hour and a half. But I had other, emails popping in, Teams messages popping in. So it's how you actually.
How did you find the chat went with the conferences? Because I certainly, speaking at Clab 365 online conference, one of the things I love about that is you pre-record and then can join the chat, and it gives you a lot more of that social element you get from real conferences. How did that go?
So it worked pretty well, because it was, both of them were just using Teams meetings. So it wasn't live events. It was just the standard Teams meeting. So you had the input, people could, they could talk, they could text in the IM, the chat window. And so you had that interaction quite easily. Most people chose not to use voice, but there were quite a lot of conversations going on. And it allowed you to have a conversation, and it allowed other people to answer questions whilst the presentations were going on as well, which was really useful. So rather than just having set moderators, community could actually contribute and discuss things.
And so that's what happens in the community calls as well, right?
Absolutely.
David Warner's usually supplies lots of the links that people are actually talking about, but within the chat itself, people who've got blog posts will say, oh, actually, I've done something like this. Here's something that I found, and you just kind of enrich that experience.
And I think that's where having an open chat forum for these sessions works really, really well. It would be a lot more difficult if it was a moderated chat forum that only certain people could actually approve things and respond.
Well, we had that. I spoke at the Midlands Microsoft 365 user group. Sorry, not the Midlands, the Leeds. That's going to upset some people. Leeds user group.
Completely different county.
I was thinking the M, so huge apologies to the good people of Leeds if you're listening. We first tried to run it as a live event, and it just didn't work because the interaction, everyone was trying to publish things. I think live events are great, and I kind of noted that on the call. It just didn't work for there. I think it does bring on to another bit of news that I was going to share around Teams. There's the user voice about the ads, a raise your hand feature in meetings has gone into testing, which I think will be absolutely fantastic. So that to me would really help these groups, the ability for someone to say, yep, I've got a question. And I know, Gary, you talked, I think, last time about the MVP summit and people using emojis with that. But I think a more formal way that you don't kind of lose track with the chat would be good.
Yeah, I think coming back to what you said about, how the sessions run with the MVP Summit, you had the person who was actually giving the session from the product group. You had someone there to moderate, to, just look at the chat and say, oh yeah, someone's got a question, right? Okay, now's a point where we can break, we can answer that question and have a discussion. So it wasn't all left to the end, but people could, jump on the mic and have some real good discussions. So that worked quite well. But it's interesting now that feature is just, it felt like the MVP Summit happened and then that feature in user voice just went bang straight out there.
What are the chances?
Yeah. So running the MVP Summit virtually in Teams was a massive challenge to do that in such a short space of time, from what was going to be a personal conference. But the product teams are actually seeing how they're using the tool as well. So you've got thousands of MVPs all using Teams, seeing it used in a way that they've probably never seen it used before. That feedback is then going straight back into user voice. So I think it's very much a good thing that's happened, because I think it's going to accelerate a lot of these features.
Talking of talking of which, and I think this has come from the popularity of Zoom and other things, another one they've said that's being worked on is show video for all people in meetings. So that nice kind of window of everyone there. As Al was noting before we started, 250 people on one screen could be interesting, but I think it'd be great.
It'd be interesting to see whether they up that number as well, based on how Teams is now being used for different sessions.
Yeah.
I would suspect that this one would come in when they've actually got more resource in the background. So I saw an article that Microsoft have put out where they've seen a 750% increase in cloud service usage in the space of 2 weeks, which is a huge number.
They did backtrack from that slightly. Did you see the update to that one? It was specifically on the Teams. I think the Teams server usage. I can't remember the detail. I'll try and dig out the link for that show notes. They initially suggested it was across all their cloud services, which is huge. They then backtracked about it being for Teams and meetings, which is still massive.
Yeah, because it's media services. Teams connects to a hell of a lot of things. So it's a good proportion of services. So,
and you see them making some changes to Teams to say, you can't use OneNote in it. You have to go to OneNote online and little things like that, just to reduce the workload.
Reduced the bit rate of the video as well.
Yeah.
So your video is slightly reduced. All those little tweaks, just trying to keep the lights on for everyone, and to maintain a service so that I guess they can go, okay, we need to optimize now and we need more resources, and that's actual computers, it's physical kit. We just see it as the cloud, but it is in a data center somewhere. Someone's going to have to put a new rack of servers in to cope with that, and that's not always an easy thing to do.
Not at the moment. It isn't.
Lifting one of those racks when you're 2 meters apart must be very hard.
Yeah, you're going to have very long arms, don't you?
Yeah.
Al, any other news you wanted to
raise? Very, very quickly, I did look at the Wave 1 launch for business apps, which has a lot of dynamic stuff in it, but a few things really jumped out when I actually was able to concentrate. So some of the interesting things around Power BI really sort of made me sit up and to pay attention. More ALM to be able to actually deploy into Power BI. For Power BI. Yeah. So more DLP in there, more auditing, so hooking into Cloud App Security in more detail, and really interesting integration with AIP, so that you can then say, if you tag a Power BI report as sensitive, for example, if you then say, I want to export it into Excel, that Excel will have the same label, so we'll have the same restrictions applied to it automatically, which is a massively useful thing to be able to do, because it means that we can really lock down how that data is being used once it's been exported out of Power BI. So it was some really interesting things in there, and I do need to watch it again just to make sure that I understand more about it. But yeah, those really jumped out as being some really powerful, compelling stories for companies to use more of Power BI.
It's interesting time that they've released that then, because at the moment, obviously, people working from home, security, compliance is such a massive thing right now, because it's almost been forced upon people. But don't do Zoom videos, because people are listening and watching. I actually saw a story,
especially if in the cabinet office,
especially the cabinet.
There was a story about which I'd seen, how someone had a Zoom meeting set up and a anonymous person just turned up into this meeting, and that was possible. That's quite scary, really, if you use it from a business perspective.
Interestingly,
there's a lot of chats going on, because there's a huge amounts of safeguarding that goes on with working with young children, and making sure you consider that when you're doing Zoom meetings has been a big topic. So great thing.
It is quite interesting, that whole concept of being able to gate crash a meeting. If you publish a public URL, is it still there? How do you can get into it afterwards? It's all sorts of things like that are now coming to the fore as things that people maybe, from a business context wouldn't have thought of doing, because a Teams meeting is internal, but for a public meeting, it's a completely different game, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I know, Al, you've got a couple of the new snippets. We'll put those in the show notes, but unless there's something you particularly wanted to jump on.
No, I think we can put the others into the show notes. If any of them are still important next time, then we can bring them up next time.
Absolutely. From my side, I've been very busy. I have to be honest, I've been struggling slightly. My wife is an NHS pharmacist, so very much in demand at the moment. And had a cough recently, so we've been in isolation. She had 7 days and we've been in 14 days. So I've had my 2-year-old, my 8-year-old and 13-year-old all at home while trying to work full time. And I'll be honest, it's been pretty darn tough. So just a big shout out to all those single parents out there who do this day in, day out. I do absolutely salute you, and I think you do some sterling work. So it's been tricky. I haven't had as much time. I'd love to be doing a bit more on the etiquette of 365. Haven't done much of that, but I've been keeping up with the news. Very interesting project that Stefan Bauer shared for those who do bot framework, getting snippets for working on that into VS Code. They've just launched a nice community project for that. So I recommend we'll share the notes to that. The biggest news that literally came out last night, so our slightly delayed recording has picked up on this, but the new modernizing SharePoint managed metadata services, something I use an awful lot. I think being able to control the metadata is key, and they talked about it as part of the Cortex release back at Ignite, and it says April we'll start to see that in targeted release tenants. So as the cheer went from Al there, I think this will definitely be very good news.
Yeah, there'll be so many things that this will change, because that's still one of the big gripes is, having to go back to an interface from way back in the day to manage metadata. Yeah. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the content type gallery plays in with, things like site designs where, we can provision content types and use them, but we don't have a centralized location for them. So this will be a really interesting it'll change the way we deploy things at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm really interested that I saw kind of flicked up on the screen briefly there, and I saw from Ignite, is that there's actually going to be metrics, so you can see how those terms are being used. And I think the content types as well. I haven't seen the full detail, but trying to see some analysis of where those things are being used or where they're not being used, I think would be absolutely key. That would be very, very useful.
I just hope, I hope and I pray that this is going to be better than the content type hub.
I was about to say that.
Yes.
That has been just the worst.
Yeah, because we just don't use that anymore because it's just never worked. So I really hope this works in a much more robust manner, because it is so useful. It makes life so much easier.
I'd like to shout out to Joel Rodriguez, should he happen to be listening, and I will try and remember to tag him, because I have a feeling he put in the project before he left us and has left me with a bit of a hornet there for a client. So damn you. Quick other bit of news, and I think this is very big news, that Pluralsight is free for April. So if you're thinking about doing some training and getting certifications while you're at home, Pluralsight is free for everyone. I signed up this morning and started to have a look at some of the courses. I know not all of us have time. I don't agree with this thing that we're all in lockdown and have plenty more time. I certainly don't, and I know many others won't. But if you do, a very good thing to try and keep up with. And on the learning and being stuck with kids, I'd also put a shout out for those. It is an online event, but it's based in the UK. There is Power Apps for big kids and little kids. So if you're interested in the Power Platform and what are kids involved, have a look at Meetup. And there is a session they're joining online to help get kids involved. So I'm going to be sharing that with my cubs shortly. I think we'll wrap up the news there. And go on to part 2 very shortly, where we're going to be talking about governance and the Power Platform. So thank you very much for listening to this part. See you shortly.